The chandelier over table 12 caught every movement like a net of light, trapping glances and half-smiles inside a pool of gold. Nathaniel Carter felt the heat of that light on the back of his neck as he checked his watch. Not because he was impatient, but because punctuality was how he steadied a life he refused to let spin out again. He had told Adrian he would do this sit-in for the man's blind date, like it was a business favor. And favors, once promised, were a contract. Nathaniel did not break contracts. He lifted his water glass, watched the meniscus tremble, and thought about the lunch Lily had packed into her school backpack that morning. Peanut butter, the purple grapes she always arranged in a heart. She would be home by now with the sitter, reading on the rug, legs kicked up, humming off-key. He closed his eyes briefly at the sweetness of that image, the way it pulled him out of these rooms where money softened every edge except loneliness. The maitre waved from the host stand. She was here. Emily Brooks paused beneath the arch, like someone about to cross a border. Her dress had been ironed carefully that afternoon on a cheap board, whose cover had long ago gone thin. The hem showed its age if you looked too closely, but the fabric fell well enough to suggest grace where her bank account could not. Her hair, a soft chestnut, was gathered into a low knot that was already loosening, little strands escaping like ungovernable thoughts. She touched the little pendant at her throat, as if confirming it was still there. When the maitre d' gestured toward table 12, her eyes swung across the room and met Nathaniel's, and all the useless architecture of the restaurant fell away. There were no chandeliers in that instant, no white tablecloths or polished forks, just one gaze recognizing another like a hand finding its twin. "Emily?" he asked. When she reached the table, rising to pull out her chair as though good manners were a fragile species he had personally sworn to keep alive. "That's me," she said, and then laughed softly at how small the words sounded compared to the beating in her chest. "You must be Nathan?" "Just Nathan," he said, and he meant it more than she could know. The first minutes were weather talk and menu choices, the social choreography that lets two strangers step inside an orbit without colliding. But the second course arrived, and with it the truth about Emily's eyes, how they sharpened when she listened, how they warmed when she asked a question that cut beneath the surface and waited for the answer like it mattered. She worked as a tutor in the afternoons and evenings, she told him, and mornings at a small cafe on 11th, where the owner sometimes let her take home unsold pastries. Her mother had begun dialysis last year, 3 times a week that bent time around itself. On those days, Emily moved like a clock was set inside her bones. "I'm sorry," Nathaniel said, and it was not perfunctory. "Does she have someone who goes with her?" "Most days I do," she said. "On Wednesdays, Mrs. Patel, our downstairs neighbor, goes with her, so I can work both jobs and pretend I'm Superwoman. On Wednesdays, I wear sneakers with my dress." He smiled, almost against his will. "Sneakers with a dress can be revolutionary. Only until it rains," she said, and her mouth tilted into a grin that showed a dimple he would later imagine pressing his thumb into to keep her from floating away. They didn't speak about him much. "He was an operations manager," he said. "Because the truth CEO of Carter Global Holdings, a man who spent mornings on earnings calls and afternoons triaging fires across 3 continents, felt like a weapon in a room where she had only brought her softest things." He mentioned that he had a daughter, and his voice changed tone when he said it, a lower music, the kind that made Emily fold her hands together beneath the table to keep from showing how much the sound touched her. "What's her name?" Emily asked. "Lily," he said. The syllable loosened everything in his face. "Pretty," Emily said. 7? He blinked. "How did you?" "You said she still likes purple grapes shaped into hearts," Emily said, and then flushed. "I guess that could be any age. But 7 feels right." "It's exactly right," he said. "You're good at this." "At guessing?" she said. "At listening," he said. Emily looked down at her napkin. She had learned in the last year how quickly listening became a currency people misunderstood. Tutors listen so they can teach. Daughters listen so they can love. The other kind. The kind where a woman listened to a man because she wanted to know him. She had set aside after grief, took up residence in her mother's apartment and stayed. But now, a door inside her chest had opened a few inches, and the room beyond it was lit by a small lamp she had not turned on in a long time. When they finished coffee, Nathaniel reached for the bill without looking. Emily saw it anyway, the way servers saw everything, and held up a hand. "Please, can we split?" He hesitated. "I invited you. Your friend invited me," she said, and gave a little laugh to sand the edge off the truth. "And I can pay for what I ate. It would make me happy to take you to dinner," he said softly. She studied him, then nodded once. Not because she was persuaded she couldn't pay, but because the tone of his voice suggested the payment was something else entirely. Something like being allowed to care. Outside, the night had turned brittle with cold. Nathaniel shrugged out of his jacket and set it around her shoulders, as though it had always belonged there. She looked up at him, ready to protest. But the look in his eyes moved her protest into another room. The cab he hailed came quickly. There was a moment when she might have said, "Come with me," and another minute when he might have said, "Stay." But each heard the unborn word in the other's silence and chose mercy for a first date. They did not know it yet, but their second date would not be a date at all, not the kind you put in a calendar and change outfits for. It would be a Tuesday afternoon, in a small park near 67th. A place where old men argued chess, and a pair of teenagers practiced a dance routine on a portable speaker. Emily had an hour between the cafe and a tutoring session and sat on a bench with a paperback and a banana. Nathaniel was late leaving the office, detoured through the park to make a call in air that smelled less like carpet and more like trees, and saw her from the corner of his eye. He did not pretend he hadn't. He sat anyway, 2 benches away so he could pretend he was accidental, then raised a hand and smiled like a man finding water in a desert on purpose. "What are the odds?" she said. "1 in a city of 8 million, he said. And then, "Coffee?" They walked, and he learned that she loved second-hand bookstores, where owners reshelved books with notes tucked inside from strangers. She learned that he cooked because the act of coaxing flavors into harmony slowed down a brain that only knew velocity. He learned that she could whistle 3 notes that always made her mother laugh. She learned that his daughter's tooth had fallen out 2 nights earlier, and the tooth fairy, late, apologetic, extravagant, had left a small origami crane with $1 inside its fold. By the 4th, not a date, they stopped pretending. He took her to a corner Italian restaurant he liked because the owner had a voice like gravel and told the same war stories every year, louder as the night went on. Emily wore a deep green dress that had cost her 2 weeks of tips when she had been 20, and it fit her like the memory of a wish she had granted herself. He brought her to his car, and then to a bookstore first, because he could not bear to make the leap from restaurant to apartment without a bridge built of paper. They browsed like they'd rehearsed it. She ran her fingers along the spines and identified 4 books by their jackets. He handed her a slim novel about a man who bakes bread he does not eat. They made each other laugh, and then made each other quiet. He took her home that night. Not to his apartment. He could not give her the shock of all that glass and the view of a city she could not imagine paying for. But to the building where he lived nevertheless, to the lobby where Lily had taped up after-school drawings on the community bulletin board. He watched Emily's face when she stopped in front of a crayon portrait of a woman with brown hair and a necklace. Above it, in wobbly letters, "Emily reading." He realized he had never seen tears flood someone's eyes and make them more beautiful instead of less. "When did she?" Emily asked. "Yesterday," he said. "She asked if I thought you'd like your hair up or down. I said both." "I can't," Emily began, and then laughed through tears because she could. "I can't believe she drew me a necklace. She sees jewelry where none exists," Nathaniel said. "It's a gift. It's a generosity," Emily said. "That's different." He wanted to kiss her then, but did not move. Somewhere in the stairwell, a dog barked twice, as if to congratulate him on restraint. The next week, everything shifted. It was not an event anyone would have identified. It was a look from a board member that went on 2 seconds too long after he said he was leaving early. It was a picture of Nathaniel and Emily at the Italian place, snapped on a phone by a woman whose job it was to send such photos to people who knew what to do with them. It was a column online that labeled Emily a mystery woman and asked how long Carter's taste for underdog stories would last. It was nothing, and then it was everywhere. The first call came from Adrian. "Mate, don't panic," Adrian said in a voice that always meant panic. A gossip account posted a photo. "It'll die down." "It won't," Nathaniel said, already looking at his calendar, already clearing his afternoon. Is Lily at school? Yes, Adrian said, and she will stay there until you pick her up. I'll follow the car. It's Emily I'm worried about, Nathaniel said. And now his voice changed again. That lower music that turned steel into flesh. She didn't ask for any of this. Emily saw the article on her phone between carrying 2 cappuccinos to a table, where a woman in a white suit told her husband a story with her hands. The caption under the photo called Emily a waitress. And somehow, that was the thing that didn't hurt. The comments did. She went to the bathroom and locked herself in a stall and breathed the kind of breath that you take to keep from crying. She left early, told the manager she was sick. He nodded too quickly. On the street, the air felt loud. By late afternoon, the attention had moved from the internet to her life. A woman she tutored called to say they were pausing lessons because things were chaotic, and you understand. Her landlord texted to ask why photographers were outside the building. At the pharmacy, a man asked if she was the one in the photo, and then looked at the total on her mother's medication and said, "Must be nice to have friends like that, huh?" She did not see Nathaniel until evening because she left her phone charging on her bed and went walking down the side streets where the trees make tunnels and the streetlights cast circles you can step in and out of like an almost stage. When she returned, 3 hours later, there he was, sitting on the bottom stair outside her building, as if he had always belonged there, a tall man in an expensive coat who looked like a boy whose kite had flown out of reach. "I tried to call," he said when she approached. "I didn't want to show up without warning. I unplugged the world," she said. "They found me anyway. I'm sorry," he said. The words were bare of everything but truth. "Are you sorry you didn't tell me who you were?" Emily said gently. "Or sorry that they found out?" "Yes," he said, and then shook his head at his own cowardice. "I should have told you the first night. I thought if I said it, you would put me in a box I didn't want to live in. You thought I would think you were only your money," she said. "Or your name. I thought you would think I was the worst version of them," he said, and gestured vaguely at a world where the worst versions of people bought tables at La Belle Étoile and pretended it redeemed them. "I didn't want to see your eyes change. They did change," she said softly. "They filled with a kind of water I didn't know I had. Because now I have to hold 2 truths. The man in the lobby, who saved his daughter's drawings, and the man whose face is on a business magazine. I know which one I love, but the other brings a storm I'm not built for." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. Their fingers knew a language their mouths did not. "We can step out of the storm," he said. "We can wait it out. Storms don't go away because you wait," she said, half smiling. "They move over, and then another comes. Then I will build you a house," he said, the line ridiculous and heartfelt. "I will build you a roof. You can't build me new lungs," she said. "You can't build my mother kidneys that work. You can't build me a new name that the internet does not know." He went very still. "I can't. But I can stand beside you while the rain falls. Half the world would pay to stand there with you," she said, and then exhaled the breath she had been saving. "Nathan, I can't hold your hand and be caught in the wind of it. Not now. Not while my life is a precarious table with a cracked leg. I have to hold up the table. I'll fix the leg," he said quickly, and then grimaced at himself. The man whose answer to trouble was always a solution. An initiative. A task force. "That isn't what you mean." "No," she said gently. "What I mean is that I need to be Emily for a while. Not Emily who dates Nathaniel." He did not argue. He had known a different version of this moment in hospital rooms years ago where machines do not argue. They only tell you what is happening. He nodded once, as if signing again the contract with himself he had signed at another bedside. To love, and not to hold, when holding became harm. He stood and pressed a kiss to her forehead and said, "Call me when you want me to bring you coffee." She smiled, trembling. "I don't drink coffee after 6. "Then I'll bring tea," he said, and left because a man who knows the shape of grief also knows when to go. He tried to become invisible for a week, and failed because power refuses invisibility. Veronica Hale made sure of it. She had sat across from Nathaniel at a negotiation once, and watched him walk away from $20 million because the terms smelled like rot. She had admired him and hated him since, in equal measure. When the gossip machine coughed up Emily, Veronica saw an avenue, ruin the Boy Scouts' image by turning love into leverage. She fed a story to an online magazine where anonymous sources suggested Emily had pursued Nathaniel for a payout. She seeded a photo of Emily at the pharmacy with a headline that asked whether the billionaire had found himself a charity case. Nathaniel called his lawyers. He called the editor. He called the private security firm and told them to put 2 men outside Emily's building, but to do it in a way that made them look like bored cousins. He called Adrian and said, "If I so much as consider taking my anger to Veronica's office, you will handcuff me to your desk." "Tempting," Adrian said. "But illegal." "Hold on to the handcuffs anyway," Nathaniel said. And then, "I'm going to have to speak. I can't let the lies control the narrative." "You're going to make a statement?" Adrian said incredulously. "About your personal life? About a person's dignity?" Nathaniel said, "It happens to be tied to my life. The press conference was scheduled for Thursday at 10, because you fight a fire when the news cycle is hungry." Nathaniel stood at a podium with a blue seal. He did not care to respect, and looked out at a field of cameras that had served him for years as a war zone where numbers were weapons. He saw, in that mass of lenses, the shape of Lily's head when she slept. He saw Emily's hands, the way her fingers tucked behind her ear when she was thinking. He put both visions in front of himself and spoke to them. "You have printed stories about a private citizen who did not seek your attention," he said. "Her name is Emily Brooks. She is a daughter who takes her mother to medical appointments, and a teacher who will sit with a child past the hour she is paid for, because the child does not believe they can read until they do. She has done nothing to deserve your cruelty." A reporter raised a hand. "Are you confirming your relationship?" "I am confirming my admiration," he said. "I am confirming that the insinuations you have published are false and have done harm. If you have a quarrel with me, it is with me, not with any woman who has ever sat across from me at dinner." "Will you be pressing charges?" another asked. "That is for my lawyers," he said. "This is for my conscience." He left the podium and did not take questions. In the elevator, he braced one hand against the wall and breathed like a diver coming up too fast. When the elevator doors opened onto the lobby, a small girl in a purple jacket ran across the marble, barreled into him, and wrapped her arms around his waist. "I'm not supposed to be here," Lily whispered. "But Miss Harper says sometimes rules are swords and sometimes they're ribbons." "I asked for ribbon rules. What did Miss Harper say when you told her that?" he asked, lifting Lily into his arms. The weight of her anchored him more firmly than gravity. She cried. Lily said matter-of-factly. And then she said, "Okay." But only because it was a love emergency. They went home and made grilled cheese sandwiches and ate them at the counter. At 6, he put Lily in the bath and listened to her voice retelling a fairy tale she was fixing, because the original did not make sense. At 7, he sat by the window and watched the evening pour itself down the glass. At 8, his phone buzzed with a message from Emily. "I saw." He typed and deleted a dozen answers that sounded like speeches or strategies, and then wrote only, "Thank you for seeing." She did not respond that night. Instead, she came the next morning. Knocking softly on his door like a question was a living thing that could be startled. Lily opened it, because she had been watching through the peephole he would find her small noseprint later like a fossil, and then threw her arms around Emily's waist with the ease of a child who has decided. "You came back," Lily said. Like a line in a movie that repairs every shattered glass at once. "I didn't get to say goodbye," Emily said, and glanced up from beneath eyelashes damp with yesterday's weather. "Then don't," Lily said. "Say hello." They drank tea, not coffee. Emily did not after 6. And Nathaniel, figuring the rule was about nerves and sleep, honored it all day, and sat at the small table that had learned to hold their elbows. Emily told him about the comments, about the woman at the pharmacy, about the way the city had felt like it was wearing knives. He told her about the press conference and how he had felt both foolish and free, like a man dropping his briefcase in traffic, because what he had been carrying did not matter as much as the person on the other side of the street. "I still don't know how to stand under it," Emily said quietly, meaning the attention, the conversation, the flood. "You don't have to," he said. "We can take the long way around. We can build a life in the corners." "And you're bored?" she said. "Your investors? Your image?" "My image is a mirror I choose to look into or not," he said. "My investors want returns. My board wants stability. They can have both, and I can have breakfast with the person I love." It was the first time he had said the word. It didn't clang or shatter. It landed on the table like a ring someone had taken off and set down without ceremony because the hand preferred air. "I don't know how to be the person people think I am," Emily said. "Neither do I," he said. "I only know how to be the person Lily thinks I am, and the person you see when you look at me. That seems like enough work for a life." She laughed, and the laugh was fragile, in a way that made him move slowly, like he was carrying a glass of water filled to the brim. She reached across and took his hand. They sat there for a long time, with nothing to prove and everything to learn. Veronica did not stop, because her kind does not. But the tide turned. One of her assistants, tired of being asked to file invoices for photographers under consulting, forwarded an email thread to a journalist who had not forgotten how to verify a source. The story that ran the following week was not a love poem they seldom are, but it was a record of facts that made readers step back and consider who was holding the pen. Veronica's name trended for the first time in her life, and not in the way a person like Veronica dreams. Her board, which had tolerated her methods because results pay for sins until they don't, asked her to take a leave of absence. She called Nathaniel and left a message that was half sneer, half plea. "You win," she said. He did not return the call. He made pasta and taught Lily how to twist the noodles with a spoon. The quieter victories are easier to miss. Emily's landlord apologized in the foyer. His face, the complicated map of a man who follows the wind until it makes him cold. The cafe owner asked if she could come back. And, when she said yes, on the condition that he would never make her feel small in front of customers again, he set down the ledger and said, "I'm sorry," like he meant it enough to change. 2 parents called to ask if she could take on their children again, and she said yes, but started a waiting list because boundaries are a form of love. Sometimes, in the evenings, she went with Nathaniel and Lily to the park and watched as Lily explained, hands animated, head tilted, the rules of a game she had invented that involved chalk circles and a shout at the end. Other nights they stayed in, and Nathaniel read from a book while Emily leaned into his shoulder and Lily interrupted to correct any pronunciation she found offensive to the ear of childhood. One Saturday, they took the train to Coney Island in coats, because the ocean in winter is a lesson in honesty. Emily stood at the railing, while the cold tried to bargain with her lungs, and thought about everything that had brought her to this exact second. The elbows on a cafe counter, coins counted under fluorescent light, a pendant that had belonged to her grandmother and now rested against the sweater. Nathaniel said made her look like she had been carved out of the first morning. They did not talk about marriage because to discuss it was to tilt the room toward a door neither wanted to rush. They did talk about surgery options for Emily's mother, about home care and finances, and how Nathaniel's help could be a bridge and not a debt if they agreed to call it family. Emily's mother met Nathaniel one Sunday afternoon and peered at him over her glasses with the kind of skepticism that keeps daughters safe. He asked if he could make tea. He set the cup in her hands with a saucer and a napkin, and then stepped back to let the 2 women converse. Later, when he left, Emily's mother said, "He puts the cup down like he knows how a hand trembles on a bad day." And Emily said, "He does." When spring came, the city thawed. Lily insisted on packing 3 sandwiches for a picnic, and then forgot about eating because a dog named Jupiter needed to be introduced to their blanket. Emily brought a book and did not read it because the light on Nathaniel's jaw kept changing in a way she wanted to memorize. He fell asleep on the grass for 10 minutes and looked suddenly younger, the CEO stripped out of him by sun. She thought about the way a life can turn, not like a wheel that completes a circle but like a compass needle realigning because a magnet has been brought into the room. The proposal, when it came, did not involve a ring box or a kneel. It came as a question in the kitchen, while Lily built a fort out of chairs and sheets and declared it a ship. It came on a Wednesday, because important things do not wait for weekends. He was slicing strawberries. She was standing on the other side of the counter with a dish towel over her shoulder because she had just washed apples and was pretending to be the kind of person who dries apples. He looked up and said, "If I asked you to marry me, would you feel like I was rescuing you or choosing you?" "Both," she said. "But only the second one lasts." "Then I will wait," he said, "until only the second is true." She leaned across and kissed him, and the kiss had the weight of answers and the lightness of a leaf finally landing. Lily, from under the chairship, said, "Yuck." And then, "Do it again." Because children understand joy as instructive, they did not set a date. What they set were the small anchors that make a life feel married even before vows. The list of foods Emily's mother could stomach this week. The schedule for soccer practice. The article Nathaniel needed to read before his meeting because a man he admired had been written about in a way that felt like a knife disguised as a compliment. They set a bedtime where the three of them piled onto the same couch and fell asleep in awkward formations that made the next morning a comedy of pins and needles. They set a rule that you could go to bed angry but not silent. In July, when the heat made metal sing, Emily's mother had a good week. She laughed twice at things that were not funny, which is the purest form of laughter. She told Emily to go to the park and not call for 2 hours. Emily obeyed because the command came stamped with maternal authority and a wink. In the park, the chess tables were populated by men with hands like old maps. Lily insisted on playing a game with a stranger who, in the kindness that can grow in public spaces when no one expects it, agreed to teach her the difference between a fork and a pin. Nathaniel stood behind her, his hands gentle on the back of her chair, and Emily stood next to him, her shoulder brushing his, and the contact sent a current through both that felt like a promise longer than language. When the first leaf decided summer was over and let go, they were ready to say the words. Not to the city, though the city would find out. It always did, but to each other, in a place where echoes could hold them. They chose the little garden behind the old church on 19th, where a plaque no one read told a story about a long-ago kindness. Lily wore a dress with yellow daisies and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that refused to stand straight. Emily's mother, still frail, insisted on lipstick and on being the first to blow a kiss when it was done. The man who officiated did not ask them to repeat lines they had not written. He asked them to name what they brought and what they hoped to leave with. Nathaniel said, "I bring steadiness, and I hope to leave with courage." Emily said, "I bring tenderness, and I hope to leave with a home." Lily said, "I bring snacks," and then added, more seriously than anyone expected, "And I hope we can always find each other, even in a crowd." They did not kiss when told. They kissed when the quiet told them it was time. After, they walked slowly. Not because the street demanded reverence, but because the moment did. A woman with a stroller stopped and clapped, as if she had witnessed the last scene of a favorite film. A man on a bench looked up from his newspaper and nodded once. A benediction from the church of ordinary approval. Emily tucked her hand into the crook of Nathaniel's arm and felt the machine of the city soften its gears. She thought about the first night under the chandelier and about this sky unscripted. She thought about all the versions of herself she had had to be to arrive here, waitress, tutor, daughter, and woman, and felt the odd mercy of discovering that each of those roles had not been costumes but rooms in a house she now knew how to live in. People would keep talking. They always do. Some would say she'd married money. Some would say he'd married goodness. On their best days, they would say nothing at all, because silence is what you owe two people who are learning how to share a life. They would have turbulence, because every flight does. They would have storms that did not announce themselves on the forecast, but the roof would hold because it had been built, plank by plank, out of attention. He would keep setting cups down with steady hands. She would keep noticing where his jaw tightened and how to loosen it with a joke that did not fix anything but made living possible. Lily would keep insisting that rules can be ribbons when love is the reason you tie them. On a late autumn afternoon, the three of them sat on a bench in Central Park while a saxophone farther up the path stitched blues into the air. The light had that particular angle that makes even strangers look luminous. Nathaniel traced a fingertip over Emily's wrist, as if reading a story there. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and watched Lily construct a kingdom out of leaves, naming each pile after a quality she wanted their family to keep. Patience, bravery, cake. What are we missing? Nathaniel asked, his mouth near Emily's hair. Time, she said. But I think we're stealing it back. We're not thieves, he said. We're gardeners. Then let's plant, she said. And he smiled because in that sentence was the answer to every question he had asked, since the day a woman stepped under a chandelier and taught him what a border is for. Not to divide, but to mark the place where you choose to walk through together. He had gone on a blind date for a friend because duty had become his reflex. He had left with a love he had not dared to imagine because his heart, patient and stubborn, had waited for a woman who would see him when he said, "Just Nathan," and make it true. And in the evenings, when the city lit itself like a show, and their windows reflected a family of 3 into a sky that made everyone look small and everyone feel large, he would hold Emily's hand and think, without irony and without fear, that the richest thing he had ever owned was the right to be ordinary in a room where the people he loved were. Sometimes, when the night was quiet enough, he would tell her the part he had left out of that first conversation. Not the numbers or the negotiations the history of his company could live in books, but the way grief had sat in the passenger seat of his car for years, and how, the night he met her, he had seen grief glance out the window and consider getting out at the next light. She would squeeze his hand and say, "Let it." And he would nod and turn up the radio and keep driving. And when Lily, from the back seat, asked if they could take the long way home, because the long way had better lights, they always did, because what is love for if not to lengthen the road you travel and soften the light that shows you where to go?